Am I on? Okay. Welcome back, everybody. For the second talk this morning, we are going to have some information, more data from space with r2cloud by Andrey Rodionov. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
That's a first. Also known as M7RED. So, Andrey, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello, my name is Andrey, and I'm a software developer in r2cloud project. And today I would like to talk a little bit about how to get more data from the satellites from space and why it's so important, at least for my project. So before I start, a couple of words about what it is. So r2cloud is an application which you install on your Raspberry Pi or any other Linux-based hardware, and it can get the data from the satellites in an automated way. So what Hita was talking previously, this is I think the next step. So you can actually get data from hundreds of satellites and process them. So the project will schedule observations, receive the data, save onto disk, then demodulate, decode, and display in a nice way. So all automated, and it all correct Doppler automatically. And then optionally, it can also send the protocol of a satellite, get it right, get it in time, and this is a quite challenging task. So in the UI, you see something like this, lots of satellites, observations, and some of the frames you can get. Within these frames, I also have decoders from approximately 60 satellites. They're very intersecting with the GR satellites, with other sources with SatNOX decoders, so I can understand in details what's going on in the satellites, like battery levels, solar panel current, voltages, etc., and just present it in a nice JSON format so it can be read. And then also the data is available, is disseminated to SatNOX, to FunCube warehouse everywhere else, but also can be available from the leosterdata.com in a JSON format, and whoever wants to analyze the data can just easily access it, and without any mess with the little and big ending and LSB, MSB. So just in a very fast format. And it's all about the data, so I'm quite frequently asking myself how to get more data, how to utilize stations even more, and how to have more impact on scientific and researchers all around the world. So I came up with several ideas, in no particular order. The several ideas, I would like to share them with you, see the results, and maybe do some analysis what's happened. Let's move on. So I think the most obvious idea is how to get more data is to get more satellites and support more satellites. That's easy. And I spent quite a time in a couple of years. This is a nice green line, unfortunately. That's what number of satellites I support. It grew from maybe 5 satellites to almost 200. That's a lot. But the blue line is actually how many CubeSats are there, according to the NanoSats database. Right, so I have plenty of room for onboarding, and I realized that a single person, it would be hard for a single person to do that work, because satellites, especially CubeSats, they're constantly launched, constantly decayed, and they need to be managed. So I decided to integrate with SatNOX. And the SatNOX has a service called dbsatnox.org. This is moderated database, moderated by community, and it contains information about satellites, transmitters, frequencies, some kind of modulation sometimes, and it's constantly updated. So very well work done by community, and by integrated r2cloud with the SatNox, everyone can get information about satellites quite quickly. And yeah, so there are several things going on with the database, so it needs to be maintained on a regular basis. And yeah, and I integrated, and I got maybe 20 more satellites that were not in my list. So let's see how the things would evolve in the future. So the other idea I had is to get a different frequency. So this is a graph showing how many satellites on which frequency. This is based on the SatNox data. So most of the satellites they transmitted on 70 centimeters, some of them on 2 meters, a little bit S-band, L-band. I might go into some high frequencies, but that would require some shift in the software and the hardware as well. So I said maybe I will set aside and just come back to this later, but more focus on this tail. It's actually not, there's not enough space here, but it goes down, down. So those satellites on these frequencies. So the other idea is to support the protocol. So this is called framing, and in just Alta it's called deframers. And those satellites, they produce custom protocols. So just imagine if you want to support 1,000 satellites, you have to go over each of them and implement their own custom, fancy, very fun protocol. And that's very tedious work. So I mostly focused on a generic, but I also support some custom. A generic X25, X100, USP. This is kind of generic. There's not many satellites on this, but it's very easy to implement. And there's a LoRa also, and that gives some ideas. So the LoRa is actually, this is a number of LoRa satellites launching over the years. So I guess most of these satellites are part of the commercial constellation Space B. But there are some of them are with the open protocols and launched recently. So there are lots of activities in LoRa as well, and thought why not? Why not? I can support this as well. And the good news about the LoRa is that it's just a separate hardware transceiver, which is very cheap, and it can receive the signal, demodulate, decode, and produce bytes, byte array, which I can parse and actually consider as a good received frame. And doesn't require any specific CPU usage on the Raspberry Pi or any other, so it's all happening on this transceiver, which is good. And it's very sensitive. It can receive with a negative SNR. So the LoRa protocol, is very good designed. The bad news about LoRa, it's a separate hardware chip transceiver that needs to be bought separately, and it's working only for a few satellites. So the pros and cons everywhere always. And this needs to be integrated with software, with existing software, how to propagate all these LoRa parameters, because LoRa parameters are not really matching what other satellites' parameters are. And they're specific to LoRa protocol mostly. And you can't get what raw IQ data, no, so you can't build a waterfall, you can't do a post-processing to see, oh, maybe I can tweak these parameters. So it gets much harder to do these things with the LoRa. So despite all of this, I decided I'll go ahead and implement something for LoRa support in r2cloud. And I created a project. This is a separate project called R2LoRa. And this is a firmware for ESP32. So, and this firmware needs to be installed on this ESP32, and then r2cloud can communicate using Wi-Fi through the router and just control the transceiver. So it can start listening for the data on a specific frequency. I can stop listening to data on a specific frequency and just get results. So the pros is that you can get this r2LoRa ASP thing and install it on the roof, on the balcony, somewhere far away from the r2cloud main station. You only need is Wi-Fi router. But the bad thing is you need a Wi-Fi router, and the power consumption is also not very good because it's working over Wi-Fi. So it worked really well for quite some time, but I decided to go further and implemented another project called LoRa AT, which is another firmware, but it's based on AT modem commands. So I simulated some AT commands over serial interface. So what you need to do is install this firmware on ASP, connect this ASP via USB to r2cloud, to Raspberry Pi, or to any other hardware, and you're done. So the pros is there's no additional router required. So this is more mobile setup where you can just bring a Raspberry Pi, put ASP on top of it, connect antenna, and you're done. And also it has a much lower power consumption. It's maybe 60 milliamperes, while Wi-Fi connection require maybe 100 or so. So a little bit better. But also, yeah, you need to bring them together all the time because they're connected via the wire. And after I implemented it, the blue line is the number of observations going on the whole LoRa data network. And as you can see, there was an increase or some steady times where it was just normal. Then sudden spike. I suspect it is the new satellites launched in this year. There are quite a few, and I added them to the network, and yeah, we had more observations. Unfortunately, there's not much telemetry going on there, and I haven't spent much time on analyzing this. Most likely something to do with software, but maybe it's just because the satellite's not really transmitting too much telemetry. But still, there's some good promising results here, which worked really well. The other thing is going back to how to get more satellites onto the network. There's a concept called new launchers where a satellite just launched, it doesn't have dedicated NORAD ID. There's only preliminary TLE, and it's not part of any other databases. So that it's really hard to track, and sometimes these satellites can just decay immediately or just stop transmitting at all because of the batteries ran out and someone forgot about something. So the idea is to track these satellites as soon as they're deployed onto orbit. And it has several challenges, as I said, but I implemented it anyway as well, and started supporting them through the network. And yeah, I had several success stories when it's hard to see here, but there's a Vega launch, Elana launch, Vega C launch, Fregat Baikonur launch. So all these launches, they had some satellites which I tracked hours after the deployment. Well, not I, but the whole network, because my stations are just very isolated. And we were getting some fresh, the real data. That's what's important. But yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement because, for example, SatNox guys who are actually tracking this thing, they're most focused on the signals, radio signals, and if they see the signal, they consider it okay, and then rarely get into details on the framing and of these signals and modulation maybe. And that's hard for me because I'm focused on the data, so I need to understand even a little bit more all the time, so I need to dig deeper a bit. But still, there are some success stories here. This was satellites. The next idea is have a better scheduling algorithm. So just to give you a context of this algorithm. So in normal situation, you have satellites transmitted periodically, right? Then not maybe 1 minute, maybe more. It depends on the satellite, of course. But these blocks are different satellites with the different windows. As Hita said, low Earth orbit satellites, they come over in 10 minutes. So these observation times are quite brief. And satellites normally transmit on adjacent frequencies or they overlap in time. So it's an NP complex problem which I need to solve in order to optimize the schedule so that I can maximize output. And in the first implementation, I went into naive implementation. It's sequential. I just split everything by time and just go over each satellite. If there's a overlap in time, I just make a partial observation. It worked for quite some time, but I wanted a bit more. So I decided, thinking it was, if I can split the whole regional band into much smaller bands and try to feed these bands into the RTL-SDR 2 MHz bandwidth, then RTL-SDR can simultaneously track several satellites. The more satellites, of course, the higher chances they will overlap somehow, over in time or in frequency. And if I do this, then I can receive several satellites at once. So what I did is called parallel, where I was split in some kind of band. So within 70 centimeters, there are several 2 MHz bands for the satellites. And eventually I can have a little bit more observations. And I measured in theory, and for 30 satellites, I got maybe 20% increase. And then I implemented it, of course. And this is what happened. This is on one of a station. So before that, there was just a steady growth of the observations because of the new satellite, etc. Then there was a spike in the observation. That's when I actually implemented this algorithm. And as you can see, there's a lot of observations were coming in, and the number of telemetry. This is green line. The telemetry also spiked significantly. And then there was some experiments on the station. That's why they were with less activity. But overall, as you can see, several months there was a very high spike, and it was so huge improvement that the station was constantly receiving a satellite. So just imagine you put antenna on top, and there's also some satellites overhead, which you need to listen and understand. So I made another optimizations in software, and all worked well. In order to do this thing, you need omnidirectional antenna. I have Discon, so that because the satellites come in from different directions, you can't track them. So you need something that can track them all the time from different directions. All right. The other idea is to get more hardware. It's obvious, right? If I connect more RTL-SDR dongles or any other hardware, I can run some observations in parallel. And that's how the new concept device appeared. So r2cloud has now a concept of a device. It's a representation of physical source of IQ data. So it can be RTL SDR, Pluto SDR, SDR server. This is something that controls these parallel executions of LoRa. And every device has its own scheduler and rotator so that you can load balance all the observation requests onto different hardware. And all observations running, of course, in parallel. Right. And this is an example of a common setup, which you might see. So we have two antennas, one antenna for 2 meters, one for 70 centimeters, and we have two parallel LNAs and the two parallel SDR devices. It might be Pluto plus RTL SDR, or might be two RTL SDRs. Doesn't matter. They manage by the single station. And yeah, you can receive simultaneously two satellites on different frequencies and process them. A bit more exotic setup when you have LNA for 70 centimeters downlink, LNA, antenna, etc. And you have LoRa running in parallel. There's one satellite out there called Norby. It can transmit both on 70 centimeters using FSK and LoRa. And they switch from time to time from one to another. And this setup can actually handle the satellite. No matter in what mode they transmit, this setup can actually receive the data. So the observations running in parallel on the same satellite on both devices. Oh, and this is another example of exotic device setup which I installed on EMF Camp. It contains RTL SDR with filter, with rotator. This one is rotator, and it's a Yagi antenna which is directional. And there's also on the roof here, just falling down a bit. It's a LoRa transceiver with a omnidirectional antenna. So I was able to do a rotation and a LoRa. And you can combine in whatever you want. You can have a LoRa with rotator. Yeah, it is possible. Why not? Okay. But the software, all right. So most of the demodulation decoding happening in software in r2cloud. It's SDR-based project. So if I just implement enhanced software, then I can get more data, obviously. There's obviously answer to this, get better DSP algorithms. I won't cover this. But there are some other, in no particular order, ideas that I had. Some generic framings, some AX25 with assisted headers, mirror satellites, so integration with SDR modem. SDR modem is a project which I wrote to actually receive and transmit via TCP. So I can send a frame via TCP, and it will be encoded, modulated, and sent to actual SDR, Pluto SDR in that sense. And I can receive demodulated streams of data. Yeah, it's based on the C, that's why it needs a bit more performance here. Yeah, so overall, here's the monthly observations on the whole LeoSat data service. There was steady growth, and then just for maybe a couple of years, for a year or something, there's an average just number of telemetry changes. It's only depends on the satellite. Some satellites might be very chatty. Some sending data maybe once in a while, just the telemetry beacons. But yeah, the goal is to make this a bit higher all the time. This is monthly active stations on LeoSat data. There was some spike. I don't know what happened. I didn't do much analysis on this, but there's some steady number of stations going on, and they're constantly working and producing valuable data. This number of registrations, I don't know if it's useful or not, but yeah, those users, active users, register on the site and just trying to use the service. There are some future plans, of course, though I intend to maybe reduce time for the new launches, maybe do some GPU computation and reduce the power consumption, because the idea is maybe to run this thing on the solar panels, which is quite neat. Maybe some better tooling for performance analysis. So if you want to optimize hardware, you need some statistical methods to see how much data you got from what direction. Maybe you need to cut the neighbor's tree. I don't know. Maybe do some uplink. Why not? It's not limited to amateur satellites only. So it's just a frequency configuration in r2cloud. So it can be configured to listen to any commercial. Why not? Yeah, and I think this is it. Questions? Welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrey. Okay, does anybody have any questions? I thought you might.
Thank you very much indeed. Dave Johnson, G4DPZ. Your scheduling algorithm, does it compensate for Doppler in your calculations?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes a frequency of a satellite which is in database, and when I group observations by frequency, I find minimum and maximum Doppler frequency for all satellites, and then I expand a little bit this band and fit it into this.
Okay, next question. Sorry.
Okay, good.
I don't know. Okay. The LoRa devices you're using, are they the TTGOs or LiDiGOs?
Yeah, TTGO, yeah. I have plans on implementing a deep sleep mode. So I'm currently working on it actually, so that LoRa AT can be put into the deep sleep until the satellite come, and then start listen for the data, send it back to base station via Bluetooth, and then go to sleep again, so that it can be run on solar panels. The idea is to run the solar panels somewhere on balcony where this is available.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have any other questions? Okay, I must admit, I personally be interested in your scheduling algorithm because it's one piece of the satellite software that I can't find any software anywhere that will actually schedule passes.
Yeah.
It's been done so many times.
But it's not.
Yeah.
It's not out there properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly relates to what you're trying to achieve from getting more satellites or data. If you just need a brief, then you might do one.
I've had a couple of goes myself.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you,
Is
guys.
there any questions from the stream, Phil? Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, I guess we've got a few extra minutes for once.